How do you feel about change? Do you prefer things to stay as they are? Or do you see change as an opportunity to build something new? However we feel about changes in our own lives, one thing is certain: our world really needs change. If we want to tackle discrimination and disadvantage, we need to work with those who experience these things to help deliver lasting change. If we want societies to be more equal and fair, we first need to understand what equality and fairness really means. At the Social Change Catalyst, we know that changing society is a process which starts by understanding the issues which affect all of us. To achieve this, we bring together people from all walks of life to help us understand the things that are most important to them. Then together, we can develop the policies and practices to deliver real change for the better. At the Social Change Catalyst, we work with the public, the business sector, voluntary organisations, higher education and the government to explore how we can best meet society's needs. Then together, we share ideas, create new innovations and make change happen. We work closely with our students so they can develop the skills to become the change makers of our future. At the Social Change Catalyst, we don't want things to stay as they are. We say change is our opportunity to build something new, together.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlie Jeffrey. I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University of York, and it's great to have you here this evening. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's event, which forms part of the University of York's Open Lecture Series and is in collaboration with the Social Change Catalyst, which is a new initiative at the University of York. The Social Change Catalyst brings together businesses and entrepreneurs, voluntary organisations, universities and government together to better understand social change and what drives it. And through engaging across those different sectors, we want to understand how higher education can nurture and empower our future change makers to use that understanding to tackle social challenges for general benefit for public good. And my colleague, Professor Karen Rowlingson, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University and Director of the Catalyst, will tell you more about this later on in the evening. But first, some context. We are in a moment of deep change, perhaps a critical inflection point, where we need to think hard and think again about the role universities should play in our shared future. We're experiencing extraordinary volatility. 6 prime ministers in 10 years in the UK. Challenger parties on left and right, trading on senses of injustice, particular places, particular groups left behind, feeling unheard. And then there's the AI revolution, reshaping our society, our economy, our labour market, challenging us all to adapt at an unprecedented pace, even and also in deep-rooted institutions like universities. And all that's unfolding amid a decline in public trust in established institutions, including universities. Too many people think we do not work in their interests. We are not relevant to them. We serve others. Now that's some backdrop, Karen, to thinking about social change. It presents an urgent need to understand better what good change is, how to deliver it, and crucially, who it's for. And that has to include those who are sceptical about us. We can't end up talking only to those who already value us. And that means thinking differently about access to higher education, but also the outcomes that come from it, as the current debate about student loan injustice underlines. And it means research that changes lives on the ground, builds opportunity, includes and empowers those who feel in some way left behind. So how do we respond? Well, at York, we've set out the ambition to be the university of opportunity in the UK. We know that talent is not spread evenly. Talent is spread evenly, but opportunity is not. Our aspiration is to change that, to eliminate gaps in access to, progress through and success at university, and to embed that ambition in the relationships we have with communities in our region. We have a whole portfolio of activities doing just that, but I wanted to mention one, which is a series of community-embedded learning centres that we have set up with philanthropic support in Grimsby, in Hull, in Bridlington, and here in York, in Westfield, the most disadvantaged part of our city, working with communities to open up pathways into positive destinations for the young people from those places. We're also working with universities across the north of England to drive on change. One key example, and you may hear a little bit more about this later, is the Child of the North research programme, which is driven by the stark fact that children in the north of England are more likely to grow up in poverty than children in the rest of England, with all the implications that has for their life chances, for social cohesion, for workforce productivity, and for the cost of public services. That's a reason, supporting young people to thrive, for us to seek, to demand, and to lead change. As is the accelerating impact of technological change. How do we ensure that human agency and values are protected as AI permeates more and more aspects of our lives? How can we ensure that technology is governed appropriately when the power of technology and technologists increasingly outweighs that of individual governments? Now, those are questions driving research at York on technology and equity, how we mitigate the risk of new technologies compounding existing inequalities. And they're questions driving our long-standing research programme on safe autonomy, the deployment of autonomous systems increasingly driven by AI in ethically sound and effectively regulated ways. Now, these are not merely academic questions, they're among the defining strategic challenges of our era. Addressing them requires a collaborative model that breaks down traditional institutional barriers, combines insight and expertise across them, and becomes a platform for action for public good. And that's why the foundation of the catalyst for social change is so important. Nurturing and sparking collective responsibility across government, higher education, communities, the public sector, business, and philanthropists. Collective responsibility for delivering social change by investing in opportunity. So with that in mind, tonight our panel of experts will explore how what we do in universities can evolve to meet the challenges of a period of extraordinary change while securing a fairer future. Chaired by Isabel Berwick from the Financial Times, the panel will feature insights from Jonathan Simons from Public First, Nicholas Piachaud from the Varkey Foundation, Anne-Marie Canning, an alumna of the University of York, who's now working amongst other organisations for UKRI, and our very own Kate Pickett from the Department of Health Sciences at the University of York. And with that, Isabel, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Thanks, and welcome everyone. I'm going to ask each of the panellists to present, something of their knowledge for about 5 minutes, and then we'll move to a panel discussion. If you have a burning question while we're having the panel, do feel free to put your hand up. I want this to be as informal as possible. Just keep it brief so it doesn't interrupt the flow too much. And then we'll move to formal questions after we've had the panel discussion. But we really wanted to frame this debate, with some provocations, some background, just so we're all clear on where we stand. And we're going to start with Anne-Marie Canning, She's, as mentioned, Opportunity Mission Challenge Director for UK Research and Innovation, the umbrella research funding body, and relevantly, she was previously CEO of the Brilliant Club, which supports young people from disadvantaged backgrounds into top institutions. Anne-Marie, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you so much. It's genuinely lovely to be back at the University of York, and although tonight I'll be talking about the government's missions, mission-led government, how we can work in mission-orientated ways, it goes without saying that one of the greatest social catalysers of the university is the education it offers to young people like me from places like Doncaster, and I'm very grateful for everything the university unlocked in terms of what's followed since I was an undergraduate here. So I'm going to be talking about the missions. For those of you who aren't political nerds, you may not be aware that the government has 5 key missions that it wishes to deliver whilst it's in power. Mission-led government has been very trendy all over the world over the past few years, and it was sort of popularised by an economist here in the UK called Mariana Mazzucato, who's got some wonderful books you can read all about it. What it's meant in its current expression for this government is 5 missions orientated around the pressing issues that are facing British society today. 1, economic growth. 2, clean energy. 3, making sure that we've got an NHS fit for the future. 3, safer streets, which is all around crime reduction. And then finally, my mission area, which is the opportunity mission. So what are missions? Missions are essentially big, ambitious goals for governments where they invite people to contribute to achieving them. In the words of Keir Starmer, he says, missions represent a politics of the common good, everyone pulling together, galvanised by clear objectives, sharing in the pursuit of national renewal. But I actually much prefer this quote, which is a quote from an army general in the US many, many years ago, where he says, never tell people how to do things, tell them what you want them to achieve and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. And that's what I think is so interesting about missions, this invite to help create change. It's not going to come from Westminster. It's not going to be purely policy-based. It's going to be much more of a contact sport to achieve the 5 missions. So those 5 missions, people are quite fond of telling you that they're not a thing anymore. Often people will say the missions are dead. And I say, well, you know, if the missions are dead, long live the missions, because these are evergreen issues that are facing countries and particularly facing us here in the UK. We will always want more affordable energy bills for people in this country. We will always want good dementia care, which is what my colleagues on the NHS mission are working on. And we'll always want kids to get a great start in life. So that's why I'm now at UKRI working on something called the Research and Development Missions Accelerator Programme, an incredibly snappy title. And you may not be aware that government has actually set aside £555 million to invest in the research and innovation that will really help us to make a leap forward in each of the mission areas. So each of the missions is looked after by a challenge director like me, someone who's a doer, but also can do a bit of thinking, who is tasked with coming up with some of those moonshot endeavours, some of those critical breakthroughs that will really help us to achieve the aims of the missions. We will be funding high-risk research and innovation that likely, in some cases, will fail, but if it doesn't fail, will make a serious breakthrough for children and young people. So in the Opportunity Mission, we're all about young people getting a great start in life, be that in even prenatal spaces, but through into early years, into schooling and education, through into the labour market. And we know it's really important that they do that from a secure home environment. And I'll just give you 2 examples of the things I've been working on in recent months. I've been in post since November, so forgive me if I seem a little early on in the stage. But first things first, we have funded some incredible work looking at neonatal babies, babies who are born premature, and what that means for their later special educational needs. This is an underexplored area of research, but if we understood that much better, we would be able to link up support through GPs, through the health visiting system, into the early years, rather than waiting for children to get to school before we say, we think you need some extra help on your educational and developmental journey. So this is really, really excellent work at a number of UK universities where academics are coming together to say, we care about this issue, we want our research to make a real life impact to change the lives of children and families across the UK. Another example is around temporary accommodation. Some of you may know that here in the UK we have a crisis of temporary accommodation, also known much more plainly as child homelessness. Families who don't have a home and are living in environments that are detrimental to their children's development and very detrimental to their educational outcomes. 189,000 children are in temporary accommodation this evening, and that means they're living in an environment that doesn't enable them to flourish. So what could we do to change that? Well, we're working with some fantastic academics to understand what's going on and some of the patterns around temporary accommodation, but to also understand how it pulls across into the education system and what we might do to start to ameliorate that. Here's a really great applied example of how we're tackling that sort of issue. We are doing an innovative retrofit of some former student accommodation at a location that I cannot name, to explore what it might look like to create temporary accommodation that is much more sympathetic to the needs of a child, allows them space to crawl, to play, to learn, to flourish as young people. So I'm giving you a sense of a very, very direct approach to tackling some of the issues, but operating in spaces where traditionally it's been really hard to pull people together to take action. And that leads me on to the role that I think universities can play. In fact, the description of this event asked us to think about where should universities be in a decade's time. It's much more immediate than that, folks, much more immediate than that. I think we're talking about the next few years and what universities can do to pull in the right direction to create that positive social change that we need. I don't think there's ever been a worse time to be a child in the UK. Okay, I'm not talking about Victorian times, right? But like in recent years, things have got a lot more difficult for children and families. And it's something that we need to face up to and be very deliberate about tackling. So yes, leaning into the missions, working with UKRI, but I think that requires universities to become much more dockable. And that's why I think the social catalyst endeavour is very, very important. I'll tell you that I spoke to someone who has a lot of power to change things in the world. And I said to them, where would you go if you needed help from a university? And they told me they wouldn't go to a university for help on social issues. They actually told me they would go to the Institute of Fiscal Studies, which is staffed by academics from our universities. But I think it shows you a really valuable thing, which is having that front door, having that place to engage, knowing the route through, and acting as that conduit for your very best breakthrough academic research that will make serious change in any of the missions. That is clearly a way that universities can make serious impact. And I think the Child of the North is similar. They haven't waited to be asked. They've developed a platform, and now they have people flocking to them to talk about the state of childhood for children here in the north of England, and shone a light on, actually, it's not that great anywhere else either. And finally, I'll say, just in terms of the energy we need to bring to these particular issues, someone recently accused me of having Gordon Ramsay energy about children's livelihoods. And firstly, I was hugely offended. No one wants to be compared to Gordon Ramsay, I don't think. But I sort of get their point, which is the tenaciousness that is needed. The tenaciousness. There's not really time for being polite and urbane anymore. This is a contact sport that we're engaged in around creating positive futures for children who currently don't have that as part of their horizon going forward. So I'm hoping universities will really find this stubborn, determined energy to tackle these issues that surround them in the places where they're located, that surround them in the regions where they are a part of the ecosystem, and are challenging us at a national level as well. So basically, come on in, the water's warm, let's get cracking on some of these missions together.
Thank you. So am I right? Nicholas Piachaud is Director of Advocacy and Strategic Partnerships at the Varkey Foundation, a global education charity. And he's previously led work for international organisations across the educational, technology and human rights sectors. So Nicholas is going to give us a kind of Should we say global view?
Yep, no problem. Global view in 5 minutes, here we go.
Yep.
Here's what I want to say. I think if we're talking about what the next 10 years look like for higher education, I think my view is this. I think we are in danger of losing that fundamental commitment to access and opportunity which has powered policy making over the last 30 to 50 years. If you look back over the last few decades, globally, there have been enormous gains. I mean, uneven gains, but enormous gains. We have brought hundreds of millions of children into schools worldwide. We have built millions of new schools. And we have also delivered access to higher education. 4 in 10 adults in OECD countries have now gone to university. And in some of the world's poorest countries, we have seen the transformational effect of higher education. We have grandparents who never learned to read and write, seeing their grandchildren get doctorates, all within the space of a couple of generations. And that's profoundly unheard of. It's never happened before. It is an extraordinary achievement, and it is an achievement of policy making. It's one, of late 20th century policy making. It's decades of investment and successive governments taking this issue very, very seriously, guided by the fundamental principle that every child should go to school and every child should have the opportunity, if they want to go into higher education. I mean, it's an achievement on the level of eradicating smallpox, putting a person on the moon. It's that level of ambition and audacity. And it hasn't happened organically. It's cost trillions of dollars to deliver at a global level, and the gains are still incredibly uneven. And I say this now because, and I can talk about this forever, but I have 4 minutes remaining. I feel politically we're moving into the stage where people are taking this access for granted, that the conversation about education as a public good has given way to education as a public service. We're moving away from audacity to managerial attitudes. And this is something that I'm seeing in conversations with policymakers around the world. You're seeing it in education funding. Less funding is going to education, less aid is going to education. Big multilateral groups are shutting down. And I think if the big conversation we had in the last century was, should kids have the right to go to school? The conversation in this century will be globally, at the global level, who gets to go to university? Is it just going to be for rich kids? Should poor kids have the opportunity to access education all around the world? And I think one of the most live political debates in global education right now, one that is indicative, is that of international students. Now, in theory, international students are like, they're gold dust. They are like the most valuable resource in global education. They deliver like billions into host countries, like $80 billion alone into the US and the UK. They dominate like STEM, they lead on research, they lead in doctorates. And yet, in the UK and the US, they are a massive political headache. We are seeing new restrictions that is making it harder for students to travel to the UK and US, to access education, to contribute to these societies and to kind of gain learning. And I think this is empirically, these students make an incredible difference. Politically, they are, at the center of this massive debate over immigration and demographic change. I think what we are seeing is some very short-sighted decisions by governments which are going to lead to long-term knock-on effects, which are going to change student migration patterns, and which just in the very, very short term are going to mean that great kids do not have the chance to go to good universities. It doesn't have to be this way. It'd be very tempting for me to sit here with 3 minutes remaining and say, all over the world the pattern is the same, that there are these growing restrictions. Actually, it's not. It's a very different picture wherever you look. You could look at Europe, like Slovenia, for example, has doubled the number of international students over the last few years through scholarships, including scholarships focused on students with hardships. Turkey is quietly cornering the kind of market for Middle Eastern students and Central Asian students. European countries, seeing what's happening in the UK and the US, are starting to introduce English language courses. So there's this market effect, like the market is responding. But on some fundamental level, I do think this question of access has become politicized, is changing. And you're seeing that at a national level as well. In the UK, I think politicians perhaps are, I mean, I don't want to jump the gun, but are souring a little bit on the idea that kids should go to university, which is a very troubling thing because the UK has the opportunity to lead at an international level, to show the way. Kids still want to come to these universities. They are some of the greatest universities in the world. There is an incredible opportunity now that the US is shutting down access. You know, we are an English-speaking nation. We are like, we are affordable. We could be redirecting student flows here. So that's an opportunity lost. What I wanted to talk about is what we can do about it. And again, I can't solve for it immediately, but what my foundation does is not approach this problem from a kind of empirical level by writing reports and doing analysis, like there's so much of that. We try to change how people think and feel about education. And the reason we do that is that we have found that actually producing reports and informing policy, like that's a very important track, but it doesn't really affect how people on the street feel about things. These are political questions as well as kind of empirical ones. So what we do are global education prizes. Like it's very simple. Our founder puts millions of dollars behind prizes that recognize and tell the stories of extraordinary teachers, students, schools from around the world, teachers and students which are having transformational impacts on their communities, taking the things that they have learned in the classroom and using it to improve the lives of their classmates, their communities. And there are some incredible stories. I remember the story of our student prize winner, Jeremiah Tharonka from Sierra Leone. When he was supposed to be learning maths in class, he was actually assembling some kind of engine to power his community. And that kind of engine then powered his kind of local neighborhood, and he scaled it up. And that's stuff he learned in the classroom. We're trying to use these stories to show the public and policymakers that access to higher education matters, and that talent is not just vested in rich kids. It can be found anywhere. And I think these kind of mass market vehicles, which people can be a bit sniffy about, and I get it, do have an important role to play alongside the policy interventions, alongside the reports. And I think it's that holistic solution that we need to be solving for. I return to you.
Thank you. Jonathan Simons is partner and head of education practice at Public First, a specialist consultancy that helps improve public policy. He's spent 18 years working on education issues, and he's a trustee of the Education Development Trust and the co-founder of ARC Greenwich Free School, so you've been on the ground too.
Well, on the first floor, maybe.
So Jonathan's going to give us a UK perspective.
Well, as a representative of an organisation that writes reports and talks to policymakers, I feel seen. I want you to imagine that you are lucky, or indeed unlucky enough, to go and see the French president or the German chancellor or anyone else from a very, very wealthy OECD nation that's not the US or the UK. And I want you to imagine that you come bearing a gift. And that gift is that you can create something which brings a huge amount of money into their country, which boosts their reputation globally, which helps create opportunity for hundreds of thousands or millions of people a year, that strengthens both theoretical research but applied research globally, nationally, locally. And they say, that sounds great, yes please. And you tell them that's what a higher education system can do. And then you say to them, I've got an even better gift for you, because the United Kingdom's got one, and it seems pretty intent on throwing it away. And so if you want it, you can have it, because it's basically going to be left in the bin. My guess is that most of those leaders would snap your hand off, because why wouldn't you? Because I want to tell you another story, and I want to think back to 1950s, 1960s, 1970s in this country, when a handful, single figure percentage, mostly men, are going to university in this country. And I want to roll forward and think about the immense social and economic changes that have happened in this country because of the widening of access to higher education. And I want you to think about the hundreds of thousands and millions of lives that have been changed. And even in the time in which I've been involved in education policy, a series of brave and not wholly politically cost-free decisions to bring universities more within the realm of a financially sustainable system that allows more people to go to university. When successive ranges of tuition fees have been introduced, and at every single stage, people have said, that won't work, it will put people off going to university. And actually the opposite happened. Higher education has emancipated more children from lower income backgrounds than ever before in this country because of the way we introduce fees and a funding system. And so we have what politicians are very quick to call a world-class system, a jewel in the crown. They'll talk about 4 universities in the top 10 in the world. Just don't always ask them which 4 it is, because beyond Oxford and Cambridge, they tend to struggle. But we are at danger of throwing this away. And so I completely agree with everything that Anne-Marie said. I completely agree with everything that Nicola said globally. But if we think of the conditions and the challenges affecting UK education at the moment, tuition fees effectively having been frozen in real terms since 2012, that's now slightly unwinding, but that means that the kind of £9,000 fees, or just over £9,000 fees, are actually only worth about somewhere between £5,500 and £6,000 in real terms. The steady, hostile environment that has come for international students, meaning that fewer of these high-value students are coming to our country. The demographic dip, which means that there are just fewer 18-year-olds in this country over the next few years, meaning that there's going to be fewer people going to university. The fact that there is greater hostility to the role that universities play amongst the general public. By the mere fact that you are sitting here in this lecture theatre, I'm sorry to tell you that you are unrepresentative of the great British public. A large minority of people, depending on how you poll it, will tell you that they have never engaged with a university in any way physically. They've never been on a university campus, they've never engaged in anything that university have done. And actually, when you ask it another way and you say, okay, have you ever participated in any research program? Have you ever engaged in any form of executive education? Have you ever been to a community event? Have you ever heard an academic speak? Again, a broadly similar proportion, somewhere between 1/5 and 1/4 of the population, and much higher proportions amongst lower socioeconomic groups will say no, that they've never engaged with universities at all. Now, it is possible that actually some of those are just not true. You know, actually, it is impossible to turn on a radio without hearing an academic at some point talk. So you might not think you have done, but a proportion of those people will have done. But nonetheless, we face a position in this country where we are in danger of, both by a mixture of accident and design, throwing away a world-class asset. An asset that most countries would kill to get their hands on. And in a world where, as Nicola said, countries in Africa, countries in Asia, countries in Eastern Europe are throwing money towards growing this ecosystem, we are in danger of letting the prize slip through our fingers. So over the next 10 years, various countries in Asia together are projected to give 1 billion degree certificates out. India, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand. These are countries who are growing higher education. Again, Nicholas has talked a lot about Africa, where Varkey does some incredible work. Huge amount of efforts going in to grow through primary, into secondary, into tertiary. And the work that we've just done in conjunction with the University of York and an international ranking organisation called QS shows that there are huge benefits in the future of the UK labour market that still come through a skilled economy. It is still the case that if you look at how this country is projected to grow, if you look at these frontier economies, you look at the areas where the government is insistent that growth will come, financial services, defence, life sciences, the creative industries, somewhere between 60 and 80% of all of those jobs will require a tertiary qualification. So yes, of course, we need plumbers. Yes, we need welders. Yes, we need people who work in the care industry. Yes, we need people who work in retail. We need all of those things and more. But don't ever let people, particularly not politicians cosplaying as working class heroes, don't ever let people tell you that this country does not need graduate labour. Because it has, It does, and it will do in the future. And the economic gain, hundreds of billions of pounds sitting there for this country to gain if we grow graduate labour in the areas we need it to be. That's the prize, that's what we have, and that is in danger of what we are throwing in the bin. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Kate Pickett is Professor of Epidemiology here at the University of York and the university's champion for research on justice and equality. She's co-founder of the Equality Trust and co-author of the best-selling books The Spirit Level and The Inner Level, and her brand new book is The Good Society, came out earlier this month. Kate, over to you.
Thank you. What on earth is an epidemiologist doing sitting here on this platform talking about education? Well, there's two reasons, and one is that education is one of the most important of the wider social determinants of well-being, of health and well-being. Education matters to our population well-being, but also we can think of educational well-being as an outcome, as a capability that a good society should want to grow for all sorts of reasons. So it's really important, I think, to be asking, what are the social, political, and economic conditions that optimize everybody's abilities, their freedom to make choices about their life, their opportunities? You, I think, used the word ecosystem. And I was really glad. No, I was really pleased because nobody had yet. You know, if we're thinking about universities, we have to think about them as being part of an ecosystem that starts operating for children before they're born, but carries them through life as well. And we need to think about education as a lifelong process. And we need to think about it as a collaborative effort that universities are part of, but they're certainly not the only thing that matters. And I think if we're thinking about that ecosystem of education, we need to ask, what is it we are trying to cultivate within it? What capabilities do we want? And the capabilities approach, which comes from Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, tells us that really we need to be thinking quite broadly about what it is we want to grow in our children, in our young people throughout life. We want to grow senses and imagination and thought and practical reason and play as much as we would want to grow exam successes or results. If we want an ecosystem that optimizes everybody's capabilities, are we close to it in this country? You know, does it look all right? Are we on track? No, we most seriously are not. We come 21st for social mobility on the World Economic Forum's rankings, which isn't very good. We come bottom of a whole set of rich countries for children's life satisfaction, and we have the biggest gap between our poor kids and our rich kids of any of those countries. We came second. That sounds good, right? We came second for bullying in our schools. We came 26th for skills well-being, and we came 22nd for how well we do on our young people achieving a basic proficiency in maths and reading at the age of 15, a basic proficiency. Only 37% of our kids did not achieve that, which is horribly bad. If you think about our school system, and our educational system, from really early years right through to universities, you can look at it and start to scratch away and see problems everywhere you look. So we have a school year that really doesn't work for many young people who find that that long gap in the summer means they lose progress. We have a school day that certainly doesn't work for parents. We have a postcode lottery for children with special needs and disabilities, although the government is producing some positive changes there. We have an admissions system to our schools that favours wealthy parents over those who are less affluent. We have an inspection system in our schools that teachers and teachers' unions are deeply opposed to. And we have a tuition fees barrier to diversity and inclusion in our universities. So lots of problems to focus on. And nobody here has mentioned actually the inequalities in educational outcomes that are really characteristic of our system from nursery right through to university. We see gaps between rich and poor children opening up before they even get to school. They widen through primary, and it's all the way through. Nobody's mentioned our divided system of private and state-funded schools and what impact that has on the system as a whole. But these are conversations that we need to be having. Our private school system is state-subsidised. It takes parental support that could really be helping our comprehensive system flourish away and sort of locks it in there, and it increases inequality. Only 7% of our kids in this country go to private school, but they occupy 30% of our best higher education institutional places. So I think what we need to be thinking about are big public conversations about the educational system we want. Before kids go to school, early childhood education and care, primary, secondary, universities. We want to think about what we're growing, and we need to be growing creativity as much as we need to be growing maths ability. We need to be thinking about how we make sure every child flourishes so that the opportunities that we've been hearing about through universities are available to everybody. I'm the first in my family to go to university. I wasn't the last. My dad graduated with a degree at, I think, the age of 80. So my family have benefited from university education in different ways and at different times. Neither of my sisters went to university, but they all were able to pursue different sorts of certification and training and professional development. So it's not one size fits all. Our universities are a jewel in the crown of British society, and they really can open up opportunities for all of us. But they don't sit alone. They are part of that ecosystem. And if we're really going to do better, I think we need a redesign, not a tweaks. We need a big national conversation, dare I say it, like the Finns did, where they thought about what to do and completely transformed their educational system and shot up the international rankings of attainment. I think we need that kind of conversation. I'm not quite sure how we get it. I was at an event last week where somebody called for a royal commission on education to think about transforming our system, and I must say my heart sank a little because I thought, another commission? And where will it go? But somehow we need to get that discussion going. And I want to end by saying that actually I am really proud to be a member of the University of York, that has as its mission that it is a university for the public good. That feels meaningful to me, so thank you, Charlie, for that. You know, it's a good feeling to be part of an institution that really is trying to create social change, that itself wants to be a catalyst for social change. And I think that universities are a context within which we can think about these big issues, and we can think about these questions, and we can train minds to tackle the big challenges. There's a lot of talk at the moment in many settings about poverty-proofing schools. I think we need to poverty-proof our society, and our education system will be part of that. And when we do that, we will all benefit. I haven't even got into the cost effectiveness of investing in education, but you know, we can do that in the Q&A. Yeah, it's definitely a win-win. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Kate. Well, I had some questions written down, but I've sort of thrown them out. I've heard so many interesting perspectives. But I just wanted to start to sort of frame the discussion by say, can we open it by saying, is there an idea of what a good societal change would actually look like, and how education fits into that? Has it changed over time? Have we got an agreed idea of what societal change would look like? Nicholas, do you want to?
Actually, I think it depends on where you look. That's a really, really interesting question. And the thing that I didn't say in my opening remarks, and I'm slightly regretting, but I didn't say it because it comes with enormous caveats, is if you look at the society which has probably changed the most and rallied behind education at all levels and invested the most and delivered the most amount of impact, it's probably China over the last 30 years. They have built, within the space of a few decades, like pretty much the world's best schools, if you look at the PISA rankings, at scale, which nobody else has been able to do. And they've also invested in tertiary education, opening access for millions of students, and those universities are now punching at a very, very high level. So I think if the conversation we're having here is about Chinese students as a kind of international commodity, I think in future decades, many of them will start to be coming back home. To your question, that is one example of a society, or at least a government very firmly in control, saying, this is the direction, this is what education looks like, and this is what we're going to deliver. Do I think it's like the best version of that? No, absolutely not. I think that the democratic ideal that the British system represents, where you have the ability not to have a very kind of myopic series of investments, where you're able to explore different interests and have people explore different things and find things out organically, is extremely promising. And I don't want to lose sight of what Jonathan said, which is, we have a wonderful system in this country. We shouldn't be kind of giving up on it. But I think what we are seeing is, as I said in my opening remarks, people souring a bit on the idea of access to higher education being a kind of universal right, that people should go to university. So I think, the question depends very much on where you look at it. What I think is very clear looking at things from a global perspective is the aspiration. If you talk to kids anywhere around the world, the aspiration is to do well for themselves, to improve themselves, and for many of them it is to go to university because they see it as a transformative experience. And I think often people are a bit cynical about it and see it as a kind of, they will get, they think they'll just get a degree and then they'll get a job. Actually, our experience of going through, at this point, hundreds of thousands of applications for our Global Student Prize, these are students from all over the world talking about what university meant to them, they really believe in it. This changed their lives. In countries like Sierra Leone, in, the Canadian Arctic, in, the US, in the UK, the opportunity university gives. It's like a North Star. So I think people may have different ideas on how to get there, but I think keeping a sense of that fundamental goal is really, really important. Yeah.
Thank you. Jonathan, how do we lose sight of that in this country? When we talk about change, it feels like we've gone off piste a bit.
I can't remember who it was that sang, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. And unfortunately, I won't now sing it. But, there is an element of complacency that all democratic governments, not just in this country, but around the world, are full prey to, discounting the things that you have and getting complacent and assuming that they'll always be the case. And I think that is one of the things that has happened. I think probably universities haven't been fault-free in this country. I will always remember in 2010, when I was working in government, the coalition government had just come in, and this was just before university fees trebled, which is the cause of all the student loan debate that's now going on in the press. Those were the decisions that were made in sort of 2010 that came in 2012. And look, leave aside the rights and wrongs of that. Essentially, what universities got as a deal was they had a load of money taken out, government money, but in exchange their fees tripled. So essentially they were cash neutral. And this was at the time that every single other public service, including the NHS, took a pretty big haircut. Now, you cannot imagine a scenario where in 2026, universities are privileged above every single other public sector body to get that kind of financial deal. And so the question is, like, how have universities gone from being the single thing that the Prime Minister of the country is going to protect above the NHS through to a world in which, you know, the Conservatives want to take 100,000 students out of university, Reform say that they want 50% of people to go into trades. You know, we don't have huge amounts of fans in political Westminster, even in the Labour Party, which has a voting base which is like 55% graduates. Even the Labour Party are sort of politely sceptical about a lot of what the university is currently doing. So the sector has not done well. Brexit contributed poorly to that. A lot of people in political life now came into political life post-Brexit. University sector was 99.9% one way on the Brexit debate. Again, I don't want to argue about the rights and wrongs, but if you're 99% backing one side and that side loses, like, you're in a bit of trouble. And so the sector has partly lost out in that way. But I just do want to sort of just come back very quickly before I stop on your sort of last question, Isabel, which is, and this is why I'm almost slightly nervous about these sort of national debate, national commission questions. And to me, education is an immensely political question, right? Big P and small p. What we should teach to our children is like the most value-driven question. Beyond the sort of like English, maths, science. But even at that level, like, let's just take maths. Like, what maths? To whom? At what age? Do we teach Shakespeare? Do we teach different books? Do we teach books from this 19th century period? Do we teach books from other cultures and traditions? Do we teach plays? Do we teach poetry? Well, suddenly I've now filled the whole week, and I haven't got the whole week, I've got 4 hours. So what do we teach our children? There is no empirically right answer. Should we have different subjects? Should we do it in a cross-curricular way? Should we poverty-proof in different ways? Like, all valid questions. And let's imagine a commission in which Bridget Phillipson and Michael Gove and Suella Braverman and Nick Clegg and Zach Polanski all sit, right? They will all have very, very different views on that question. So I just don't think we can have an empirical answer to what is a values-driven question. And that's democracy, right? Democracy is messy. Very, very easy for China to build good schools. They have one person who makes a decision on what the curriculum looks like, and bang, 10,000 schools are built tomorrow. We don't have that, and long may that continue.
Thank you. Anne-Marie, when we think about your moonshots, or, you know, what's the imperative for adding value in the short to medium term in the education system and more widely in the ecosystem we've discussed?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Research and Development Missions Acceleration Programme comes from a place where we know some of these things are really stubborn, right? So, like, business as usual is not going to get us to where we need to go. So if you look at the gaps in school readiness between wealthy and less wealthy children, if you look at the gaps between pupil premium children and wealthy children in terms of academic outcomes, like, they have been there a long time. We started to make some very modest progress before COVID, and then we got slammed decades back. Like, we lost 10 years of progress. So it's going to take something different. And I think that's where the sort of origin of the programme really lies. And we know that if you take a moonshot approach to things, so you'll know this stuff about, you know, you're putting a man on the moon, and okay, we're putting a man on the moon, but actually that unlocked many, many other technologies and many other advances. And so this idea that if we, you know, gear ourselves towards a mission, if we identify the things where we think there's a good chance of making a breakthrough, we'll have lots of other additional breakthroughs as well. So I think it does genuinely come from the assessment that we are working with some very stubborn issues, and without this sort of research and development investment, we've got no way of getting towards them. If I just say it on a very simple level, when I go to school leaders, or when I go to housing folks, or when I go and speak to people in the NHS, there's no capacity to think beyond what we need to do today and how we need to meet the need right now. It's called the innovator's dilemma, right? It's impossible to think beyond. That's why things like the SEND reform are so difficult, because it requires a huge leap forward in terms of thinking beyond the current parameters of the system. So that's why I'm quite hopeful about the opportunity. I always used to say at the Brilliant Club, you know, old ways won't open new doors. And I think we've lost a little bit of our spirit of willing to try new stuff because we are feeling, I think, the national mood is quite trampled right now. The sense of optimism is quite trampled. And so I think it's really important that we have an opportunity to try new things, give people a chance to really show what they're capable of and get some breakthroughs.
Thank you. And Kate, you know, with the work you're doing on inequality, you know, when we place human flourishing within that, you know, what's the role of universities or perhaps the whole education system in teaching? It often gets lost in the debate, particularly at the moment. You know, what does that look like for everybody who's accessing it, and how important is it?
Yeah, and I think that's right. But I think it's really important to remember that every time we think about an inequality that exists within our education system, and we can see them from very, very early onwards, that there's a story there as well as a statistic, that we are talking about wasting people's happiness, capabilities, well-being. And that's really bad for them, but it's really bad for society as well. So I think there were new statistics out today, aren't there? We're at almost 1 million NEET, that's young people not in education, employment or training or entrepreneurship. 1 million. It sort of takes me back to what it felt like in Thatcher's Britain when I knew people who went from one youth opportunity training scheme to another and actually ended up really never breaking out of that. 1 million young people in this, the 6th or 7th or 5th, or depends how you count it, richest country in the world. 1 million young people's talents being wasted. We can't afford that as a society. They should be in our universities or in our apprenticeship schemes or being helped to flourish and develop their well-being, because that is good for all of us. It's good for all of us when poor people's children do as well as rich people's children. So I think there's a social justice perspective that's really important here, but inside that social justice perspective, there's an awful lot of distress and suffering that needs to be ameliorated and mitigated. An awful lot of people who come through our educational system and their overriding feeling when they come out of it is, I don't like school and I'm stupid. So we need to deal with that. But there is this population, societal, economic benefit if we get it right by tackling those inequalities.
And we haven't mentioned AI yet. Oh, Charlie did. But Jonathan, you know, in terms of education policy in the UK, everyone's talking about how schools and universities are not delivering the workforce of the future. But, and we were mentioning just before we came on stage, there is a slight feeling, I think, that STEM is not the be-all and end-all, and actually the humanities are starting to come back into vogue. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you see things standing there and how that might change?
Yeah, I mean, the scale of labour market disruption that will come from AI is quite staggering. And I don't say this as an AI booster or indeed particularly an AI skeptic, but just as a sort of an empirical fact. The level of disruption that will come from jobs in this country, in other advanced economies, in developing economies is pretty staggering. What our work with York and QS looked at was, and it's always very hard to judge this, the number of jobs that will be augmented or aided versus the number of jobs that will be disrupted, right? So to take it really simply, if your current job is retail, it's pretty hard to see that being anything other than automated away, right? Well, I mean, it is already. Like, you go to Tesco's and it's all self-service machines rather than checkouts now. But, you know, that is a classic example of a job which is going to be automated even more. Frankly, even a lot of what are sometimes called white-collar jobs, right? If your job is legal research or bookkeeping, again, it's incredibly easy to see how those jobs are automated. But actually, more jobs are likely in the UK to be augmented than automated. So the net positive should be a net positive in the UK labour market. But, you know, that was also true when we moved away from coal mining. like overall at a macro level, the UK economy benefited, but you put a map of where the coal mines used to be against the map of where like UK educational disadvantage might be, and it maps pretty closely, right? If you go around Nottinghamshire or Derbyshire or bits of County Durham and you're still in pit villages, like it's no point telling people that East London is now booming, thanks very much, and the average GVA in this country is higher, because if you're a white working class kid in Tudor in County Durham, you're not really benefiting from Stratford booming with AI people. So I do think it will benefit us on a macro level, but it will be a bumpy transition, and you know, the redistributive effects will be quite messy, and that's a real public policy challenge for government, because you know, employers aren't going to do that because they're not really incentivized to do so. Government and education systems are going to have to do that, and that's about retraining adults. It's about recognising different ways in which you recognise the talent of people coming into universities or further education. It's about thinking about ways in which you can accurately assess how you teach children, how children learn, how you model what they learn. You know, these are big challenges, and we've got a sort of fairly standard model as to how we do that at the moment. I quite like it, not everyone does, but you know, a big chunk of it will have to change because of AI.
Is that an existential threat to the current education system?
I don't think it's an existential threat, because systems adapt, right? Democracy is messy, but systems adapt, and you know, we adapted to the internet, and we adapted to calculators, and we adapted to, you know, women going to education in the same ratio as men. Like, we have gone through pretty major changes, but this is undoubtedly a major change. At the moment, the UK government approach is basically, let's sort of see what happens, while saying to everyone we're in a leadership position. I mean, we can't possibly be in a leadership position, right? If you look at the amount of money that essentially large US-dominated AI companies are spending, I mean, billions upon trillions of dollars, as long as their share price holds out and it doesn't all crash. But like, it is about the same amount of money as the whole UK government spends on everything is going into buying NVIDIA chips and allowing Anthropic to grow. Like, we are kidding ourselves if we think we can lead in this space, because we're not big enough. So it's very anti-democratic, but we are going to have to respond to the global wave, and we're going to have to work out what that looks like. And I don't know what the answer is currently, but we are going to have to respond to it.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on AI? Nicholas?
Yep. Love you looked at me and was like, yep, AI. No, here's, so some half-formed thoughts. Yeah, so I agree with Jonathan. I'm interested in the impact on education systems itself. So there's a couple of things happening. So one is, at the moment, being in the global education sector is kind of like being at the end of a fancy meal where you're looking around the table and you assume somebody else is going to pay, and you're gradually realizing that nobody has any money. The AI sector is the one sector that does have money, so they are increasingly dominating the political narrative around education development, both at the primary, secondary and tertiary education, because they have money. And because they're interested in education, you know, partly as a public good, I genuinely do believe that, but also because, frankly, AI companies have run out of organic data to train their models on. Like, there's not enough data on the internet, so they're looking abroad, and goodness, if they have access to hundreds of millions of students around the world, that's an extraordinary amount of data. So if you're interested in the kind of parochial discussions about private education versus public education and a kind of very basic state system, what happens if every school in the world is suddenly using ChatGPT? Well, in a sense, that is like a private education takeover at a massive level. And I don't think the implications of that have been thought about in any kind of particular way. From a policy perspective, I'm interested because governments are making kind of some very, very short-term snap decisions about tech, which are only relevant for 5 years or so because tech is changing so quickly. If 5 years ago you geared your education system to be producing like only coders because you were convinced that coding was the future of you know, higher education and what everyone should be going into, you're in serious trouble now because Claude can now kind of basically do coding, you know, without help from coders. And the final point I wanted to make was, and this is like really why I love education. I worked in tech for a bit. I came back to education, and one of the reasons is because education is so interesting. We have like decades of evidence on tech and education, and most of that evidence tells us that tech just kind of bounces off education systems. Like most ed tech, I mean, this comes with lots of qualifications. Most ed tech does not work. It works in individual classrooms. It works like in 100 classrooms. It can even work in 1 million classrooms, but it doesn't scale across education systems. And the reason behind that is not that the tech doesn't work, although like having used my kids, like my maths system, often it doesn't. But the reason's often political, like they go into procurement, they go into scaling, they go into the lack of kind of infrastructure and technological readiness among teachers. And those are all things we haven't solved for yet. So I do worry that policymakers are making short-term decisions. They are turning over big decisions to AI companies. And I think they should kind of keep control and keep, and this is very important in education, that long-term view. Like, education is a very difficult ship to change course for. And I think we shouldn't have this kind of massive course correction before we know how the future of the labour market is going to shake out. So some powerful reflections from me.
So I'm going to move to questions in a minute, but Anne-Marie, I've always been interested in the idea that, you know, all this amazing research and potential for social change is happening in universities, and I know York is a notable exception in that, you know, it's very embedded in the community and action happens, but how can we get research out of universities and into the community? I mean, my area is work and future of work and management. Business schools around the world are chucking out research that never gets implemented in the real world, and I imagine that happens at scale in every university.
Oh my gosh, the question of university research overall. I mean, let's just think about the most practical examples of some of the most high-impact research we've seen in recent years. And I'm going to talk about Born in Bradford, Kate. I'm so sorry, because you're involved and it's your baby and you know it better than me. But, you know, Europe's largest cohort study, longitudinal cohort study in Bradford for the people of Bradford. Power dynamics are right, pointed at a clear issue, set up from the beginning to serve the people that it was researching, with a real eye on real life application, you know, based in a hospital rather than a university, all these contributing factors. So I think, you know, we've got a pretty good sense of ideas about how you can take university research and make it happen in the real world. I've encountered lots of university spin-outs in the special educational needs space recently. That's been a real trend in recent years. There's a whole range of routes through, but I think we're not very good at acknowledging our academic colleagues who are here to make impact in the real world. And I always think about Professor John Wright. He was awarded an Ebola medal for his work in Sierra Leone. I don't understand why we don't recognise the civic contribution of academics who are on the front line making change day in, day out here in the UK, on our domestic agendas, on our agendas here in Britain. So, you know, I'm new to the world of academic research. I've always worked in universities, but I've been on the side of like, how do you open up a university? How do you create great student experiences? How do you boost young people through to the labour market? But looking at the research space, you know, it's obvious that there are some of our colleagues who are really fantastic at that translation, are really brilliant at that impact piece. And we can learn a lot from them. So I think we look at where it's happening really well and how we can take that and spread it yet further. I also think some of the data infrastructure that we now have in the UK is absolutely spectacular. You know, it's been such a joy working at UKRI and the ESRC and, you know, not just learning about the cohort studies we have, but administrative data linkages. I mean, that sounds so boring, but it's so incredible. It's so incredible. Education and housing data, talking to each other. What? You know, tax records, talking to education records. You know, some of the data linkages that we now have, some of the smart data that we're starting to feed through, I think we've got a really exciting sort of horizon ahead of us, but we've got to make it work day in, day out, for people who say, I don't love my local university.
That's exactly right.
I tell you why my mum loves my local university. It researches on MS pain, multiple sclerosis pain, and she's a multiple sclerosis sufferer. Everyone has a reason to love a university, but we never really show them.
Yeah, well said.
Kate, I'm going to finish on your new book. You know, what's your hope for your new book and how it relates to our discussion tonight? You know,
what's my hope for my
what's
new
one
book?
change that might come out of it?
One change, all right, I'll pick one.
Yeah.
One thing I think we should be thinking about trying to develop in this country is something like NICE, which is our National Institute for Clinical Excellence, but for social policy. Because NICE is not beloved by everybody, but it works. So if a new treatment comes along or a new intervention, whatever, a new pathway, the evidence is looked at to see if it's effective. And then the evidence is looked at to see if it's cost effective. And if it's cost effective at a certain threshold, then it becomes available on the NHS. So we don't have to ask our government to make difficult decisions about rationing healthcare. We take it out of their hands and we give it to experts, and we mostly all the time accept that. Why aren't we doing that for social policy? So Nobel Prize-winning economist Jim Hackman at the University of Chicago says that for every, he says dollar, but let's say pound, for every pound you invest in early childhood quality stuff up to age 5, you get £13 back. That is a brilliant return. That's better than you get on most infrastructure projects or other sorts of government investment. So really we need to find a way to take it out of the hands of politicians to say, I'm going to do that cost-effective thing about putting the right money into early childhood education and care, because we would have an institute that would say, that is value for money. That is going to pay off for society in the medium term. So let's do it. So there, that's one idea. There's a lot more in there.
No, that's brilliant.
You all
idea.
have to read it.
Thank you. I'm going to thank you so much to the panel. I'm going to throw it open to the audience now. We have some mics. Does anybody have a... Oh, yes, at the very, very front here.
Yeah, I still think that universities seem to have, and research seem to have, a helicopter view of what's going on. And I was quite interested when you mentioned about Westfield, because Westfield, as a ward, is one of the poorest in York. And yet, there is a sense of community where I live. I live in that area. And I think that you've got to get rid of inequality, and that's one of the things you must get rid of. And there's all sorts of ways you can do that, and your research could certainly help in that way. But I think that I've heard a lot about education, but you've got to have a curiosity, you've got to capture children's curiosity, people's thirst for learning, children's thirst for learning. And they're very capable. And they are, when they're small, they have such curiosity, such questions. And that seems to have not been captured in some children that, for all sorts of reasons, are in that group that are not exactly poverty-stricken, but there's certainly a lot of disadvantages there. And it seems to me that you've got to get an appetite in children for lifelong learning. And we know that because look at the number of adults that have been, let's say, working people. And then along comes something like the Workers' Educational Authority. You never hear of those now, do you? And also the Open University. My goodness, what a revelation that was. Certainly for people like myself. And it was the first step up, if you like, for me as a registered nurse, you know, to do something with my life. And I think that you've got to have this, it's about learning, it's about lifelong learning, about getting rid of inequalities. And it's not all about money, it's about communities working together to make children feel valued. They can't have a thirst for learning if they're not valued. And I think there's an awful lot of children that we've lost in a way. And what are they doing? They might be just roaming the streets, they might not be interested, but we want them to read, don't we? We want them to go to theatre, we want them to enjoy their life, because, my God, if AR comes along, you know, those people will be lost, won't they, without having some kind of thirst to know what they're going to do with their lives.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you. Does anyone want to come in on that? Kate, how are we thinking about lifelong learning? That's a very real point, isn't it? Children get disengaged very early.
Thank you for mentioning WEA. My parents used to go to WEA classes all the time. It was the only time they ever went out, actually. No hot dates for them, but they took classes year after year after year. They do still exist, they are around, but not so widespread as before. And we have things like the University of the Third Age, which provides lifelong learning for many people, and the Open University, of course, is still there, a marvellous institution. But I think your point about fostering children's thirst for learning and creativity and joy in learning is important. And joy is a really important word there, I think, because that will stand people in good stead for their lives. And I read a fascinating article today that said, it asked, why did Norway get so many gold medals in the Winter Olympics? They did get a lot of gold medals, far more than anybody else, and they're a really tiny country. And apparently, in Norway, there is no competitive sport until children are at least 12. So they are encouraged to take part in sport and engage with different things for joy. And they use the word joy. Joy is the aim of Norway's physical education programme. But it also gets them a lot of gold medals as well. So I think this is a useful lesson to us if we're thinking about our education system. Most primary school kids do like school. They're enthusiastic about it, they're happy to learn. An awful lot of secondary age school children do not like school. In fact, 27% of kids of secondary school age in this country today are persistently absent. And some of them are a lot more absent than the definition of persistently absent. So we do need to find ways of getting that joy back. That means we need a system that really supports our teachers to focus on children and learning and creativity more than on standardized tests. So I think that's the conversation we need to have. Oh, that was popular, wasn't it? I'll stop there.
Thank you. Right, does anyone else have a question? Oh, yes. I think the lady with the green card, thank you.
Hi, thanks. I'm going to start my question by framing it from a perspective that we are in the process of destroying the living systems on which we all depend on our planet. And I would suggest that our education system has contributed to a degree to that in the lack of understanding the systemic nature of life and the relational nature of life. So with that as a context, I'm thinking about what should education consist of and look like, because lots of conversations about we need access to education, but what should our education consist of and look like? Because I wonder if there's a fundamental paradigm shift that's required for us to really see our place in the world and our relationship with nature, for example. So I'll put that to the panel.
Great. Who would like to take that?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Really important question. And we probably have not thought about that systematically within our education system. How do we ensure that our planet is preserved and is allowed to flourish as well as people? And it's got to be part of our educational system going forward, because we are facing that kind of emergency. I had a colleague in Italy, actually, he was the friend and he was made Minister for Education, to his great surprise. But that's Italian politics for you. Lots of churn. People get jobs very quickly and then lose them. And he instituted education about sustainability and the environment and the climate was to take place at all ages in all schools. And he got it through. I'm not sure it's still there because of that nature of Italian politics. But I do think we need to be thinking about it. There are some great initiatives like forest schools and other things. There is more attention, obviously, in places like our Department of Environment and Geography. We have a York Environmental Sustainability Institute, and we have our Leverhulme Centre for Anthropocene and Biodiversity. So in various places, that kind of education is happening, but it's too specialised still. And it needs to be much more broad-based, and it needs to start early. And yeah, thanks for that question. It's an important
Nicholas
one.
wants to come in on that with the global.
No, I think it's a good question. I think there have been a lot of international efforts actually over the last 10, 15 years to address this. So you do have international climate change education you do have kind of various different initiatives led by different multilateral groups, and there's been quite a lot of money poured into it. What I think we're missing actually is the next step, which is like, how effective has it been? Like, how much has it changed people's behaviors? And that's actually very, very hard to measure, because I think a lot of what's happened is stuff has been dropped into the curriculum to build climate literacy, like the idea that the climate is changing. Not a lot has been done to tell people what meaningfully they can do to change things. And I think that's probably the next step. My worry is, and again, this goes back to my kind of wider point around international education generally, like the money is draining out of the system. The funding to do that is not there. So I think we're at this kind of inflection point where we have enough evidence to say, this is what's worked, this was what hasn't worked, but we are not going to have the kind of money or the political will to action it, because governments are pulling back from that commitment to access to education, particularly at the higher level. I think it's a good question. Yeah.
Can I come back? Because I think there's so fall into the trap, I think, of going, it's a, like you say, fall into the trap of thinking this is an environmental thing or a sustainability thing, and I think it's a relational, human nature or living creatures thing, which can touch into democracy, it can touch into art, it can touch into environment, it can touch into all of these different areas, but we separate these things out all the time. And that part of the problem with education is because we separate out all the time, when actually we need to look at how do we cross these things over. But I'll stop there.
But Jonathan, is anyone working on these sort of boundaryless curricula?
Yes, actually, and it's, you know, what is sort of sometimes called interdisciplinarity in the higher education space is very much in vogue, and you're absolutely right. You know, if we take, you know, Anne-Marie's challenges, for example, I mean, the whole point of mission-led government is that, you know, who is responsible for, you know, opportunity? You know, is it the Department of Education? Well, yes, but it's also the Department of this and the Department of that and the Department of that. And the whole point of mission-led government is like, the minute you just give this to one organisation or one silo, you miss a trick, right? So you absolutely need to cross those boundaries. And again, yes, in education, there are some fascinating schools that are kind of creating this kind of much more cross-cutting curricula. There are lots and lots of schools that really do focus on, you know, the sort of relational aspect that you talk about. I think is absolutely right. I think at the risk of being reductionist again, though, the thing that I find most inspiring about looking at it from a sort of sustainability lens, and it, again, comes back to the point about applied research, and it partly is happening here at York as well. This is working on a day-to-day basis because consumers are now having access to things which are making it more possible. So the cost of solar panels is just dropping exponentially, right? The effectiveness and cost of battery technology is dropping exponentially. The ability of anyone in this room, or most importantly, anyone in India or China or some of the world's biggest polluters, to have access to technology which on a day-to-day basis solves for these things is incredible, right? We are now able to clean the Ganges River in India using technology that was at least partly invented in this country. I mean, that is phenomenal, right? Right here in the University of York, it's being developed essentially kind of net zero cotton, right? Cotton is one of the most incredibly expensive, polluting materials to create, right? It's one of the reasons why fast fashion is so dangerous. If we can create cotton in a neutral way for all the uses that cotton is used in industry, in retail, in things that people wear, I mean, transformative, right? If everybody can have technology that powers their house, whether it's a 5-bedroom mansion in Surrey or, you know, houses in sub-Saharan Africa, which are, you know, powered by essentially generators. Like, if we can change that, if millions of people in China can have access to clean, green energy, that's the way in which you solve this, right? It's partly being done by grand global challenges, but it's actually solved on a day-to-day basis by people all over the world having access to things which are feasible and doable and manageable, and that, almost all the time, comes from university research, and it's incredible.
That's a
Can
fantastic...
I just say something about interdisciplinarity? Having worked in interdisciplinary research centres here at the University of York, with Born in Bradford and many other things, jack of all trade, master of none. It's quite hard.
Yeah, it's very hard.
Often.
Yeah.
And it's not hard because it's difficult to break down those disciplinary barriers with your colleagues. It's hard often because funders aren't particularly good at it, so I'm nodding at Anne-Marie. It's hard because the reward systems within university systems, and indeed sometimes just the governance and support structures, aren't necessarily geared to it. So sometimes we're doing it despite funders or despite institutions. But when we do it, it's fabulous because that's how you really, really get change. And if you want good interdisciplinary researchers, then you need that very broad-based encouragement of curiosity that you were talking about, because it's that kind of curious mind, I think, that brings people into those interdisciplinary research collaborations.
Thank you.
I'm troubled by that question. I feel like we can't nail it on this panel somehow, and I wonder if it's something about young people having an education that enables them to, and I'm interested in the word relational, and are able to relate to the world around them, be that individuals, environments, issues, technologies, etc. And so it's more of a set of skills that I think we're losing across all parts of society, actually, around how we participate in public life together and how we create change together, or how we stop things together. And I wonder if it's something more about the skills that young people can secure through, yes, citizenship, but more active democratic participation in an education system. But I feel we've sort of, it's a tricky question, and I don't think we've quite got that one. So I've loved it. Thank you.
Well, we've cracked it. We could, honestly, I feel like we're only just warming up, but I'm afraid we're drawing to close. I'm going to call Professor Karen Rowlington on stage to close the debate. So thank you all so much for being so attentive. We could have had many more questions, I'm sure.
Thanks very much. It's been an absolutely fascinating evening, I think, and great questions. So I'm just going to say a few words about the social change catalyst. We've heard a bit about it tonight, so I'll just say a few things and then I'll close tonight's event. And so as Charlie said earlier, the catalyst has been set up to help us understand the nature of societal challenges that face us today, and then use that understanding to achieve social change for public good. Now, as a university, we can't do this alone. It's all about collaboration. It's about the contact sport that Anne-Marie talked about earlier. So we're working with and across our academic disciplines and departments, with our students, with members of communities, different communities in different places, the skeptics, the people who have never engaged with us before. We don't want to be that helicopter. We want to be working with and listening and learning from communities, not thinking we know the answers, but trying to develop and understand what the challenges are together. So that's the approach we're taking. Also working with the different sectors, the private, the public, the voluntary sector, trying to bring those partnerships together. So we've got a new vehicle for this, starting with our region of York and North Yorkshire, a partnership for social change, which brings together all these different actors and agents, if you like, and focusing on the challenges that we face in our region, as we do in many other regions. So challenges like violence against women and girls, community cohesion, opportunities for young people in coastal and rural areas, and how we share wealth more fairly. We've got lots and lots of work going on in this space. We've only just started, although actually at the University of York, we've been doing this since we were founded in the 1960s. It's what we are based on, and that's why we're going back to those fundamental values and that university for public good that Charlie and Kate have also mentioned. So you can find out a lot more on our website, because I know time is short here. Please do have a look at our website. Please do read our blog. So on our blog series, and Kate's written one of our blogs, and we've got a number of others coming through, we're actually asking that fundamental question that Isabel mentioned earlier, actually, what is social change for public good? We don't necessarily have the answers. We want to have a discussion and debate about what it is. So what is it, and how, once we've worked out what that might be, how do we achieve it? We're also currently planning a new series of webinars so that, again, people can tune in from wherever and be hopefully as inclusive in different ways about what are the forces for good in society. And we'll have debates about that, taking different kinds of forces like AI. This is one of the themes we'll be looking at, but entrepreneurship, community activism, the police, are these forces for good? How can we amplify the good that these different drivers of social change can have, and how can we reduce the potential for harm from any of these sources? So please do keep in touch with us and keep an eye out for the webinars. We'll advertise them shortly, and we'd really love to see you online as well as in other events that we'll do face-to-face. Finally, and back to tonight, just to say a huge thanks to our chair and all our speakers, because we've had a really varied set of contributions, but all of them highly engaging and insightful, that have left me at least with much to go away and reflect on, but more importantly to act on, because that's what we need. We need action, we need change, I think. So please join me in thanking our chair and our speakers, first of all. And then secondly, I'd like to thank our organisers. There are lots of people who have helped put this together, but in particular Joan Concannon, Kate Moores and Naomi Richards. So thank you to all our organisers. And then last but not least, thank you to all of you for coming today, for participating. Brilliant questions that, you know, have kept our panel thinking, and that's what education, that's what learning's about, challenging ourselves to think differently, and your questions have really helped us to do that. So please do keep in touch, but let's just have a final round of applause to all our audience, all our speakers, everyone that's made this event possible today. Thank you.